They exiled her at 11 years old for lying about a blizzard. Gunnar Holmgren, who had survived 9 Dakota winters, told the teacher to send her home. Her kind of foolishness gets children killed. She had no coat, no family within 3 miles, and a storm moving faster than a horse. On January 12th, 1888, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in 15 minutes. But 3 hours earlier, Inger Aslaksen had never sealed a door against weather in her life. She saw the sundogs at 7:30 in the morning, walking the frozen road to the Pleasant Valley schoolhouse, with her breath pluming white and her fingers already numb. 2 bright spots flanked the rising sun, shimmering, iridescent, impossibly vivid against the pale January sky. Mock suns, the Americans called them. Her grandmother had called them Solhund, sun wolves, and her grandmother had taught her what they meant. When the wolves chase the sun, the killing cold follows. Inger stopped in the middle of the road and stared. The sundogs blazed with red and orange at their inner edges, fading to white at their outer curves, perfect, terrible, beautiful. She had seen them twice before in her 11 years, both times in Norway, both times followed by storms that buried villages and killed livestock. Her grandmother Solveig had been dead 2 winters now. Her father Lars had followed 8 months ago, taken by typhoid and a single week of fever and delirium. Her mother Brita lived 3 miles away in Minor, sewing dresses for American women who did not know how to read the sky. Inger was alone with her grandmother's voice in her head. Tell them. They must know. The morning was warm. That was the wrongness of it. 40 degrees and rising after weeks of cold so brutal that water froze in pails beside the stove. Children had been kept home for days. Cattle had died standing in their stalls. And now this, a bright January morning, snow melting in patches, the air almost soft. Everyone would think the danger had passed. Inger knew it was just beginning. She reached the schoolhouse at 8 o'clock, her chest tight with urgency. The other children were already there, 17 of them, ranging from 6-year-old Emma Lindgren to 14-year-old Peter, who was nearly a man and treated Inger with the dismissive patience older boys reserved for younger girls. They had come without coats, without mittens, without overshoes. The warmth had fooled them all. Miss Newcomb stood on the porch, her face flushed with relief at the mild weather. She had been teaching only 3 months, sent from Illinois to civilize prairie children, and she had never seen a Dakota blizzard. When Inger approached her, the young teacher smiled. Inger, such a lovely morning. We might even open the windows later. Miss Newcomb. Inger heard her own voice, thin and urgent. There's a storm coming. A bad one. I saw sundogs this morning, bright ones. My grandmother said, sundogs? Miss Newcomb's smile flickered. I don't know what those are, dear. Lights beside the sun. They mean a blizzard is coming. Hours, maybe less. We need to keep everyone inside. We need to... Inger! The voice came from behind her, heavy with authority. Gunnar Holmgren climbed down from his wagon, his weathered face set in disapproval. He was 52 years old, Norwegian like her family, and he had survived 9 Dakota winters. He had lost 2 fingers to frostbite in the hard winter of '81. When Gunnar Holmgren spoke about weather, the township listened. Inger boarded with his family during school weeks. He was her temporary guardian, her protector, the man who should have believed her. He did not. Sundogs are old country superstition, Holmgren said. He gestured at the bright sky, the melting snow, the warm breeze. Look around you, girl. Does this look like blizzard weather? The cold has broken. We should be grateful, not spreading fear. But I saw them. They were bright, brighter than... You saw light playing tricks. Holmgren's voice hardened. My bones tell me weather, girl, not lights in the sky, and my bones say spring is teasing us early. He turned to Miss Newcomb. The child has been filling the younger ones with nonsense. She frightened little Emma half to death yesterday, talking about people freezing in their beds. Miss Newcomb's sympathy curdled into uncertainty. She looked at Inger, at Holmgren, at the beautiful morning. Perhaps Inger is just worried. The winter has been hard on everyone. Worried spreads. Holmgren fixed Inger with a stare that held no warmth. The girl spreads poison. Send her home before she panics the younger ones into running out into a storm that isn't coming. Her kind of foolishness gets children killed. The words landed like a blow. Inger felt her throat close. Mr. Holmgren, surely, Miss Newcomb began. Send her to my farm. My wife will put her to work until she learns to keep her mouth shut. Holmgren pointed north toward the farm 1.5 miles away. Walk, Inger. Think about what happens when you spread lies. Inger looked at Miss Newcomb. The teacher's face was apologetic but closed. She would not argue with Gunnar Holmgren, not the man who sat on the school board, who had survived winters that killed lesser settlers, who spoke with the authority of hard experience. Go on, Inger, Miss Newcomb said softly. We'll see you tomorrow. Inger's coat hung on a peg inside the schoolhouse. Her mittens were in the coat pocket. She had set them aside when she arrived, grateful for the warm morning. Holmgren did not offer to retrieve them. She walked away from the schoolhouse in her cotton dress and thin wool stockings, carrying only her dinner pail and her school reader, a battered copy of McGuffey's Fourth that her father had bought her the year before he died. The sun was warm on her face. The breeze was gentle, and the northwest horizon was changing. She noticed it when she was perhaps a quarter mile from the school, a darkening along the edge of the sky, as if someone had smudged charcoal across the white. It was not clouds exactly. It was something thicker, heavier, a wall of gray-black that seemed to eat the light. The temperature dropped 5 degrees in the time it took her to walk another 100 yards. Inger stopped. She turned and looked back at the schoolhouse, a small frame building growing smaller with distance. She could still run back. She could pound on the door, demand her coat, force them to listen. They would not listen. They would say she was hysterical. They would say she was lying. They would send her out again, and by then the wall would be closer. She looked north toward the Holmgren farm, 1.5 miles, 25 minutes at a fast walk. The farm had thick walls, a stone foundation, a root cellar. If she could reach it, the wall was moving faster than a horse could gallop. Inger understood with the cold clarity of an 11-year-old who had already lost half her family that she could not reach the farm. She could not reach the schoolhouse. She could not reach any building on the open prairie. She was going to die out here unless she found shelter where she stood. The ravine. The thought came to her like a whisper in her grandmother's voice. A quarter mile east of the schoolhouse, in a shallow cut where a seasonal stream ran during spring thaw, there was wreckage from a failed threshing operation, machinery abandoned in '85 when the venture went bankrupt. Inger had walked past it dozens of times. She had peered into the ravine out of childish curiosity, seen the rusted hulks of equipment too heavy to move. One of those hulks was a boiler. She did not know what a boiler was, not truly, only that it was a great iron cylinder where they burned coal to make steam that powered the threshing machines. It had been sitting in the ravine for 3 years, too massive for any team of horses to drag away, too worthless for anyone to claim. Iron. Her grandmother's voice again. Iron holds heat like a stone holds memory. Inger did not understand the physics. She did not know that 3 tons of iron could store 14,000 BTU of thermal energy, that body heat in a sealed space could raise the temperature 30 degrees above ambient, that the volumetric heat capacity of steel was 4 times that of wood. She knew only that her grandmother had heated iron trivets in the fire and placed them in the bed to keep warm through Norwegian winters. She knew that the iron stove in the Holmgren farmhouse stayed warm for hours after the fire died. Iron held heat, and iron blocked wind. The wall on the horizon was closer now, a smear of darkness eating the blue. The temperature had dropped another 3 degrees. Inger could feel the wind shifting, turning sharp. She had minutes, not hours. She ran. The ravine was steeper than she remembered. She half climbed, half fell down the frozen slope, her school reader clutched to her chest, her dinner pail banging against her leg. The boiler lay at the bottom like the skeleton of some ancient beast. 14 feet of rusted iron, frost-rimed and half-buried in dead grass. It was a locomotive-type boiler, though Inger did not know the terminology. The barrel section was roughly 42 inches in diameter, just over 3 feet, tapering to a firebox at one end and a smokebox at the other. The firebox door hung open on corroded hinges, a dark rectangle approximately 2 feet across. The opening was barely large enough for an 11-year-old girl. Inger crawled inside. The darkness swallowed her immediately. The interior smelled of rust, old ash, and something chemical, residue from years of burning coal. The floor of the firebox was coated with soot that blackened her hands and dress. She could see almost nothing. The only light came from the open firebox door and a few gaps where pipes had been removed, but she was out of the wind. She pressed her palm against the iron wall. Cold, terribly cold, but solid, unyielding. The wind could not reach her here. The crystallized snow that would soon be driving across the prairie at 60 miles an hour could not touch her inside this shell. If she could seal it. Her grandmother's voice. A house with gaps is a house for ghosts. The firebox door did not close completely. The hinges had warped, leaving a gap of 2 or 3 inches along one side. The ashpan dampers at the bottom were rusted open. Somewhere at the far end she could hear wind whistling through the smoke box. And there were holes where gauge pipes had been removed, circular openings 1 to 3 inches across, each one a pathway for the killing cold. Inger did not have tools. She did not have materials. She had her dinner pail, her school reader, and her bare hands. She crawled out of the boiler. The sky had gone gray. The wall was perhaps 2 miles away now, and she could see it clearly. Not clouds, but something denser, a roiling mass of darkness shot through with white. Snow, she realized. Snow moving horizontally at the speed of a galloping horse. She had 15 minutes, maybe less. Prairie grass. She grabbed handfuls of it from the ravine slopes, dead and dry and brittle, ripping it from the frozen ground until her fingers bled. Mud. The stream bed held ice-crusted earth that she chipped at with a rock, gathering lumps of half-frozen clay. Her apron. She tore it from her waist, thin cotton, but something. Pages from her reader. She hesitated only a moment before ripping them out, crumpling them, making material from words. Back inside the boiler. She packed grass into the gaps around the firebox door, pressing it tight with bleeding fingers. She smeared mud over the grass, sealing it. She stuffed her apron into the largest pipe opening, twisted pages into the smaller ones. The ashpan dampers she packed with mud and grass until nothing moved through them, the smoke box at the far end. She crawled the length of the boiler on her hands and knees, 14 feet of darkness, the iron pressing close on all sides, until she reached the circular door. It hung loose, rattling in the rising wind. She could not seal it completely. But she packed grass around the edges, pressed mud into every gap she could reach, wedged her dinner pail against the door to hold it closed. One opening. She remembered her father's words about the root cellar. You can suffocate in a sealed room. She left a gap near the firebox door, small, perhaps 2 square inches, enough for air to seep in, not enough for the wind to follow. The light through the gap was gray now. The temperature inside the boiler had dropped sharply in the minutes she'd spent sealing it, her body heat escaping through every opening she'd just closed. She was shivering violently. Her fingers had no feeling. Her feet were going numb inside her thin stockings. And then the storm hit. She did not hear it coming. One moment there was gray light and rising wind. The next, there was only blackness and a roar like a locomotive bearing down at full speed. The entire boiler shook. Snow, fine as flour, sharp as ground glass, drove through the tiny ventilation gap in a horizontal jet. Inger pressed her face into her school reader, protecting her eyes, feeling the ice particles sting her exposed skin. The temperature plunged. She could feel it dropping degree by degree, the cold seeping through the iron walls, through her cotton dress, through her skin. The boiler that had seemed merely cold now felt like a coffin of ice. She curled into the tightest ball she could manage, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around her legs, face buried against her thighs. She made herself as small as possible. She tried to stop shivering, but her body would not obey. Iron holds heat, but there was no heat, not yet. Her body produced 300 BTU per hour, enough, in theory, to warm the small space by 20 or 30 degrees over time. But her body was cooling faster than it could warm. The iron was draining her. She began to pray. Norwegian words her grandmother had taught her, half-remembered liturgy from a church an ocean away. Fader vor, du Samari Himmelen, our Father, who art in heaven. The words came out as whispers, then as breath, then as silence. The wind screamed, the boiler shook. Snow found every imperfection in her seals, sifting through in thin streams that melted against her skin and then froze. Time lost meaning. She did not know how long she had been inside, an hour, 2 hours, a lifetime, when she realized she was no longer dying. The shivering had slowed. Not because she was succumbing to hypothermia, she'd seen that happen to a calf once, the trembling stopping as the cold won, but because the air around her had changed. It was still cold, terribly cold, but not the killing cold of the first minutes. The iron walls, which had seemed to radiate frost, now felt merely cool. Her body heat. 300 BTU per hour trapped in a space of 40 cubic feet. The iron absorbing it, storing it, reflecting it back. The air temperature inside the boiler had stabilized somewhere above freezing. She could not measure it, but she could feel the difference. Her breath still plumed white, but her fingers had regained enough sensation to ache. She was not comfortable. She was not warm, but she was alive. Outside, the storm raged on. The wind had not diminished. If anything, it seemed stronger. The roar of it constant and unchanging, a sound that filled the world and left no room for thought. She could see nothing. The ventilation gap admitted only darkness and the occasional spray of ice crystals. She thought about the schoolhouse, about Miss Newcomb and the 17 children, about Gunnar Holmgren, who had sent her out into this because she told the truth. Were they warm? Were they safe? Her kind of foolishness gets children killed. Inger closed her eyes and held her school reader against her chest and waited. The knocking came in the early afternoon, though she had no way of knowing the time. At first she thought it was the storm, debris striking the boiler, a branch torn from some distant tree and hurled across the prairie. But the sound was rhythmic, metallic. Someone was hitting the boiler with something hard. Then she heard the voices, muffled by iron and wind, barely audible over the roar, but unmistakably human. Children's voices, screaming. Inger crawled to the firebox door. Her hands found the seals she had made, mud and grass and torn pages, and she hesitated. If she opened the door, she would let in the killing wind. The warmth she had built would vanish in seconds. She might die. But someone was out there. Children were out there, in the storm, in the dark, in the cold that killed in minutes. She tore away the seals. The wind hit her like a fist. Snow drove into the boiler, into her face, into her lungs. She could see nothing, only swirling white and gray, formless chaos. But she could hear the voices now, closer, desperate. Help! Help us! Please! A shape materialized in the white, a boy, perhaps 12, carrying something in his arms. A smaller figure stumbled beside him, clinging to his coat. They were 3 feet from the boiler opening, and they could not see it. "Here!" Inger screamed. "Over here!" The boy's head turned. He saw the dark rectangle of the firebox door. He lunged toward it, and then they were inside, tumbling through the opening, collapsing on the sooty floor, gasping and crying. The boy, a girl, perhaps 9, and in the boy's arms, limp and pale, a smaller child. Inger recognized them, Wilhelm Rask, Karin Rask, and the bundle in Wilhelm's arms, 7-year-old Anna, who had been walking home when the storm hit, the children of Elsa Rask, the woman who had said good riddance to the Aslaksen girl. "Help me seal the door," Inger said. Wilhelm was crying, his face streaked with snot and tears and ice. Karin was curled in a ball, shaking so violently that her teeth chattered audibly. Anna was not moving. "The door!" Inger grabbed Wilhelm's arm. "We have to close it or we all die." Something in her voice reached him. He moved, slowly, clumsily, his frozen hands fumbling, but he moved. Together they wrestled the firebox door as close to shut as the warped hinges would allow. Inger grabbed fistfuls of the remaining grass, the remaining mud, packing it into the gaps. Wilhelm helped. The wind howled through every imperfection, but slowly, inch by inch, they sealed it. The roar dimmed. The snow stopped driving. The darkness became merely dark, not the violent swirling chaos of the open storm. Inger looked at Anna. The 7-year-old was pale, not merely cold pale, but gray, the color of something that had started to die. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were closed. Her chest moved, but barely. Inger had seen this before. Her grandmother had treated it in Norway. Children pulled from frozen rivers, farmers caught in mountain storms. You did not rub the limbs. You did not move the victim more than necessary. You warmed the core, slowly, with body heat and patience. "Take off her coat," Inger said. Wilhelm stared at her. "She's freezing. The coat is soaked. It's making her colder. Take it off and put her between you and Karin. Hold her against your bodies. Breathe on her face. Talk to her." "I don't." "Do it!" Inger heard her grandmother's voice in her own words, sharp and unyielding. "I'll warm her feet." They arranged themselves in the cramped space. Wilhelm on one side, Karin on the other, Anna sandwiched between them. Inger curled at Anna's feet, pressing them against her stomach beneath her dress. The cold of Anna's skin was shocking, like touching ice, and Inger's body screamed at the contact. But she held on. 4 children in a boiler meant for one. 4 bodies producing 1,200 BTU per hour. The space was crowded, uncomfortable, the air thick with their breath. But the temperature was stabilizing. The iron walls were absorbing their combined heat, reflecting it back, creating the survival loop that had kept Inger alive. Anna's feet were like stones against her belly. Inger held them anyway. Outside, the wind screamed on. The hours blurred together in the darkness. Inger could not see the other children. The blackness inside the boiler was absolute, but she could feel them. Wilhelm's shoulder pressed against her side, Karin's elbow digging into her ribs, Anna's frozen feet against her stomach, slowly, impossibly slowly, beginning to warm. The storm did not relent. The wind screamed without pause, a sound so constant it became a kind of silence, a roar that filled the world and left no space for anything else. Snow found the imperfections in their seals, thin streams of ice crystals that melted against warm skin and then froze again. The temperature outside was dropping. Inger could feel it in the way the iron walls radiated cold, in the way each breath hung visible in the dark. But inside the boiler, 4 bodies were winning, 1,200 BTU per hour. The combined heat of 4 children trapped in a space of 40 cubic feet, absorbed by 3 tons of iron and reflected back. The air temperature had stabilized somewhere around 25 degrees, cold enough to see breath, warm enough to survive. The iron that had seemed like a coffin was becoming a cocoon. Anna stirred. It was a small movement, a twitch of her foot against Inger's stomach, but Inger felt it like an electric shock. She pressed her hands tighter around the girl's ankles. "Anna?" Karin's voice, ragged with cold and fear. "Anna, can you hear me?" A moan, low, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakably alive. "She's waking up," Inger said. "Keep holding her. Keep breathing on her face." "Is she going to be all right?" Wilhelm asked. His voice cracked. He was 12 years old and trying to sound like a man, but the terror leaked through. Inger did not answer. She did not know if Anna would be all right. Hypothermia killed in ways that were not always visible. The heart could stop hours after the body warmed. The brain could be damaged in ways that would not show until later. All she knew was that Anna was alive now, and that was more than Inger had expected when she saw the gray pallor of the girl's face. "Talk to her," Inger said. "Tell her stories, sing to her, keep her mind working." Karin began to sing. A Norwegian lullaby, Bissen Lansen, the same one Inger's grandmother had sung to her. The familiar words floated through the darkness, thin and trembling, but steady. Wilhelm joined in, his voice deeper, rougher, harmonizing badly, but trying. Inger held Anna's feet and listened, and tried not to think about what was happening outside. At the Pleasant Valley schoolhouse, Miss Newcomb was fighting for her life. She would tell the story later, to newspapers and historians and anyone who would listen. She would tell it as a confession. The storm had hit at 11 minutes past 11 in the morning. One moment the sky was gray, the next the world turned white. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 15 minutes, from 38 above to 6 below. The wind struck the schoolhouse like a hammer, rattling the windows, tearing at the tar paper roof, driving snow through gaps that had been invisible in calm weather. Miss Newcomb had 17 children in her care. 17 children, most of them without coats, without mittens, without any preparation for what was happening. The fire in the cast iron stove was already burning, but the wood supply was low, perhaps 4 hours' worth if she rationed it carefully. She had made a decision. At 10:30, before the storm hit, she had dismissed school early. The weather was turning, Gunnar Holmgren had said. Better to send the children home while conditions were still mild. 14 children had walked out the door. 14 children scattering in different directions across the open prairie, heading for farms that were 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles away. 3 children had stayed behind, the Lindgren siblings whose farm was 5 miles distant. Miss Newcomb had kept them, intending to walk them part way herself once the others were gone. The storm caught all of them. When the white wall hit, Miss Newcomb could no longer see the road. She could not see the farms. She could not see anything beyond the schoolhouse windows except swirling, shrieking chaos. She gathered the 3 Lindgren children and tried to wait. The fire burned down. The wood ran out. The temperature inside the schoolhouse dropped toward freezing as wind drove snow through every crack in the walls, under the doors, through the keyhole. By 2 o'clock, there was ice on the inside of the windows. Miss Newcomb made another decision. She knew there was a haystack 200 yards south of the schoolhouse. She had seen it that morning, a dark mound against the white snow. She roped the 3 Lindgren children together, tied herself to the end of the line, and led them out into the storm. They found the haystack by luck, stumbling into it when they had already lost all sense of direction. Miss Newcomb dug into the hay with her bare hands, hollowing out a space large enough for 4. They crawled inside and pressed together, buried in frozen grass, and waited for the storm to pass. 2 of the Lindgren children survived. Emma, the youngest at 6 years old, did not. Peter Lindgren, 14, had not stayed at the schoolhouse. He had walked out with the others at 10:30, confident that he knew the prairie well enough to reach home. His body was found 200 yards from the schoolhouse. He had walked in circles, unable to see, unable to find shelter until he could walk no more. His frozen hand was reaching toward the building he could not see. Inger did not know any of this. She learned it later in the terrible days of counting bodies and telling stories. In the darkness of the boiler, she knew only that the storm was still screaming and that Anna Rask's feet were finally warm against her skin. Inger. Wilhelm's voice came through the darkness. How did you know to come here? She considered the question. How do you explain grandmother's wisdom to a boy whose mother called it witch talk? Sundogs, she said. I saw them this morning. My grandmother taught me what they mean. Sundogs? Lights beside the sun, like wolves chasing it. She struggled to find the words. In Norway, when the wolves chase the sun, the killing cold follows. My grandmother's mother knew it. Her grandmother before that. It's in the old stories. Mr. Holmgren said it was superstition. Mr. Holmgren was wrong. Silence. Then, my mother said you were trouble. She said you spread lies. Inger felt something tighten in her chest. Anger, perhaps, or grief, or the particular pain of being hated by people you were trying to save. Your mother can think what she wants. I'm still glad you found me. More silence. Then so quiet she almost missed it. I'm glad too. The wind died at dawn. Inger did not realize it at first. The roar had been so constant, so all-encompassing that its absence felt like a physical shock. The silence pressed against her ears. She lifted her head from her knees and listened. Nothing. No screaming wind, no rattling iron, no driving snow. Only stillness, vast and absolute, and somewhere beyond the boiler walls, the faint creak of settling ice. Is it over? Karen whispered. Inger crawled toward the firebox door, her joints stiff, her muscles aching from hours of cramped stillness. Her fingers found the seals, mud and grass, half frozen, still holding. She pulled at them, slowly, carefully, not knowing what she would find on the other side. The first light in 18 hours stabbed into her eyes like needles. She squinted, blinked, and saw white. White everywhere. Snow drifted against the boiler, piled 3 feet high on the windward side. The sky above was pale blue, cloudless, innocent, as if the storm had never happened. The air was utterly still and cold, so cold that her first breath burned her lungs. She pushed through the snow, widening the opening, and crawled out into the ravine. The prairie stretched before her, flat and featureless, a blank white page. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. In the distance she could see dark shapes against the snow. Cattle, she thought, frozen, standing where the storm had caught them. Closer, something that might have been a horse. The sun hung low on the eastern horizon, pale and cold, without a hint of the sundogs that had warned her. Anna could not walk. Her feet were badly frostbitten. She would lose 2 toes, they learned later, and she cried out when Wilhelm tried to lift her. Wilhelm himself could barely stand. His fingers were blackened, his face raw from wind-driven ice. Karen was shivering so violently that her teeth chattered audibly. Inger looked north, toward the Holmgren farm. 1.5 miles across the frozen prairie, with 3 injured children, and a temperature that had to be 30 below. They could not make it alone. "We wait," she said. "Someone will come looking." "What if they don't?" Wilhelm asked. "They will." She tried to sound certain. "When the storm broke, people started searching. Someone will come." She helped them back into the boiler. Warmth was warmth, even now, and they huddled together in the darkness, listening to the silence, waiting. Gunnar Holmgren had not slept. He had reached his farm before the worst of the storm, walking the last quarter mile through wind so strong he had to lean into it at a 45-degree angle just to stay upright. His wife Marta had hot coffee waiting. His farmhouse had thick walls, a stone foundation, a root cellar stocked with food. He was safe, and he knew with terrible certainty that children were dying. He had stood at the window as the storm raged, watching the white chaos swallow the world, counting the hours. 17 children had been in that schoolhouse. 17 children, plus Miss Newcomb, and the Aslaxen girl, Inger, whom he had sent walking across the open prairie an hour before the storm hit. Her kind of foolishness gets children killed. His own words, his own judgment. He had been so certain. When the wind died at dawn, Holmgren was already dressed. He had his heaviest coat, his warmest mittens, his fur-lined boots. He kissed his wife. She was crying, though she tried to hide it, and walked out into the frozen silence. He found Peter Lindgren's body first, 200 yards from the schoolhouse, face down in the snow, one hand reaching toward the building he had never reached. Holmgren knelt beside the boy, brushed the ice from his face, and said a prayer in Norwegian. Then he kept searching. He found the haystack where Miss Newcomb and the Lindgren children had sheltered. Miss Newcomb was alive, though barely frostbitten, half delirious, clutching the 2 surviving children with hands that had turned black. They were taken to a neighboring farm, where a doctor was summoned from Minor. He found the Anderson children, all 3 of them, huddled in a snowdrift 1/2 mile from their farm. 2 alive, 1 dead. He found the Sorensen boy in his family's barn, curled among the pigs for warmth, alive. He did not find the Rask children. He did not find Inger Aslaxen. By mid-morning, Holmgren had gathered a search party, 4 men on horseback, spreading across the prairie in a widening pattern. They found bodies. They found survivors. They found the particular horror of the children's blizzard. Mittens lying in the snow where small hands had dropped them, school readers scattered along paths that led nowhere, a bonnet frozen to a fence post. At 8 o'clock, Holmgren's horse carried him past the ravine with the abandoned threshing equipment. He had ridden past it 100 times. He had never given it a second thought. But this time he saw movement. A small figure crawling through the snow, climbing up the slope of the ravine, turning to face him with a frost-burned face, frost-blackened fingers, and eyes that held neither fear nor surprise. Inger Aslaxon. Holmgren dismounted. He could not speak. He stared at the girl, at the boiler behind her, at the seals of mud and grass visible around the firebox door, at the three other children now emerging from the iron shell. Wilhelm Rask, Karin Rask, and in Wilhelm's arms, pale but breathing, 7-year-old Anna. The sundogs, Holmgren said. His voice was hoarse. It was not a question. Inger nodded. You saw them. You warned us. Another nod. And I sent you out to die. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had sent her out to die, and she had lived. He had kept the others safe, and some of them were dead. Holmgren removed his coat. It was heavy wool, lined with fur, the warmest garment he owned. He walked to Inger and wrapped it around her shoulders. She was so small inside it, 11 years old, thin from a winter of rationed food, shivering despite everything, that the coat hung nearly to her ankles. I was wrong, he said. I sent you out because I thought you were lying. I thought I knew weather better than an 11-year-old girl with her grandmother's stories. He looked at the boiler, at the iron shell that should have killed her. Your grandmother knew things I don't understand. Inger looked up at him. Her face was unreadable, exhaustion, perhaps, or the particular blankness that comes from surviving something that should have killed you. The others, she said, at the schoolhouse, are they? Holmgren's face told her before his words did. Some lived, he said. Some didn't. Peter Lindgren died 200 yards from the school door. He couldn't see it in the white. He paused. Emma Lindgren died in a haystack with Miss Newcomb. She was 6 years old. Inger closed her eyes. She had known Emma. They had played together at recess, braiding each other's hair, trading secrets in the way of young girls everywhere. Miss Newcomb says she should have listened to you, Holmgren continued. She says she should have kept everyone inside. She says, his voice broke. She says you tried to warn us. I did. I know. He took a breath, steadied himself. The whole township will know. I'll tell them myself. I'll tell them the Aslaxon girls saw the storm coming when I couldn't, and I punished her for it. And she lived anyway because she's smarter than an old man with 9 winters' experience. He lifted Anna into his arms. She was too weak to ride alone, and helped the other children onto his horse. Inger walked beside them, wrapped in Holmgren's coat, her feet leaving small prints in the snow. They did not speak again until they reached the farm. Mrs. Elsa Rask arrived at the Holmgren farmhouse at 10:30 in the morning. She had spent the night in her cabin, alone with her terror, watching the storm pound against her walls. Her 3 children had been walking home when the white wall hit. She had no way to search for them. She had no way to know if they were alive or dead. When the storm broke, she had run to the Holmgren farm, the nearest neighbor, hoping for news, fearing the worst. She had prepared herself to learn that her children were frozen in a snowdrift somewhere, that she would have to bury them beside her husband, that she would be alone. What she found instead was Inger Aslaxon, sitting at the Holmgren table with bandaged hands and a cup of hot coffee, watching over 3 sleeping children bundled in quilts. Her children. Mrs. Rask stopped in the doorway. She looked at Wilhelm, at Karin, at Anna, alive, all of them, though Anna's feet were wrapped in rags and Karin's fingers were blackened. She looked at Inger. Inger met her eyes and said nothing. They were in the storm, Mrs. Rask said. Her voice was flat, unreadable. How did they found me. Inger's voice was steady. I was in the boiler in the ravine. I sealed it against the wind. They knocked on the door, and I let them in. The boiler. Mrs. Rask repeated the word as if it were foreign. The old threshing machine boiler. Yes, you let them in. They knocked. Mrs. Rask stood there for a long moment. Her face worked through emotions Inger could not read. Relief, confusion, something that might have been shame. The woman who had said, "Good riddance" to the Aslaxen girl was looking at the girl who had saved her children. She did not apologize. She did not thank Inger. She walked to her children, gathered them in her arms, and held them so tightly that Karen whimpered. When she finally spoke again, she spoke to the room rather than to anyone in particular. Anna will lose a toes. 2, Inger said. Maybe 3. But she'll walk. Mrs. Rask nodded. She lifted Anna. The girl was awake now, groggy but aware, and carried her toward the door. Wilhelm and Karin followed, leaning on each other, not looking back. At the threshold, Mrs. Rask paused. You let them in, she said again. They knocked, Inger said again. Mrs. Rask left. By spring of 1888, at least 12 families in Gero County had identified emergency shelters using the principle Inger had discovered: sealed metal structures with walls thick enough to block wind and mass enough to hold heat. Abandoned boilers, train cars left on sidings, mining equipment in ravines. Inger explained her method to anyone who asked, using no technical terms, only the logic her grandmother had taught her. Iron remembers heat, she told them. Wood forgets it. When the wind comes to kill you, hide in something that remembers. County records do not track how many lives this knowledge saved in subsequent winters. But the Easter blizzard of 1891 killed far fewer children in southeastern Dakota Territory than anyone expected. Families who had heard the Aslaxen girl's story knew where to run when the sky turned black. Inger shared freely. She wanted no credit, no payment, no recognition. She wanted only this: that no one else would die the way Peter Lindgren died, 200 yards from safety, reaching for a door he could not see. Inger Aslaxen remained in Dakota Territory. She married a Norwegian farmer named Erik Dahl in 1896, taught school for 7 years in the same township where she had once been exiled, and raised 4 children of her own. She kept her grandmother's primstav, a Norwegian calendar stick marked with weather signs, hanging in her kitchen until her death. She never stopped reading the sky. She lost the tips of 3 fingers to the frostbite of January 12th. She never regained full sensation in her feet. On cold mornings, she walked with a limp that her students noticed but never mentioned. She died in 1941 at age 64, in the same township where Gunnar Holmgren had once called her a liar. Her grave marker bears only her name and her dates. No mention of the blizzard, no mention of the boiler, no mention of the children she saved, but everyone in the county knew the story. They told it to their children, and their children told it to theirs. On January 12th, 1888, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in 15 minutes. Gunnar Holmgren said her kind of foolishness gets children killed. Inger Aslaxen's foolishness saved 4 lives that day, her own and 3 children belonging to the woman who had called her a witch. It did not bring back Peter Lindgren or Emma Lindgren or the others who froze in the white. It did not undo the decisions made by people who thought they knew better than an 11-year-old girl with her grandmother's stories. But in a ravine a quarter-mile east of the Pleasant Valley schoolhouse, a 14-foot boiler rusted in the prairie grass for another 30 years. Farmers passing by would stop sometimes and look at it, a great iron cylinder, half buried in weeds, and tell their children about the girl who sealed herself inside. The boiler was finally hauled away for scrap in 1918. By then, everyone in the county remembered what an 11-year-old had discovered when the wolves chased the sun, that iron holds heat like a stone holds memory, and that sometimes the ones who see the storm coming are the only ones who survive it.